In this video, I'm going to cover basic DIY plumbing tools that every DIYer needs for the more basic kind of jobs that most people will find they need to do. So this is anything from taking radiators off the wall to decorate, leaking compression fittings, that type of thing, what you need to fix those. And all the tools I show, I'll add links for in the description. So the first one is adjustable spanners. Now, I've actually got a set here. These are Barco ones, so it just comes in a set of 3 in different sizes. And I actually wouldn't recommend getting these. What I'd instead recommend is a pair of these Knipex or Knipex, or however you want to pronounce it, where this is still an adjustable spanner, so it still adjusts up and down, but where it's got this leverage, you can really squeeze down on the fitting. So when you're using it on a compression fitting or something, or on a radiator, especially if you've got like a nice stainless steel one, the chance of you scratching it with these jaws is much lower because you get a nice amount of pressure onto it, whereas these adjustables, it's quite easy for you to end up actually just burring the edges of the nut. Now, these are actually the 250s. They come in a range of sizes, and the 250 is the one I use by far the most, but I've also got a smaller set. I've got the 180 set here. And this is also useful for smaller stuff or things where you can't get quite into the space. And you can see the size difference there. It's quite a significant size difference with these. But as I said, this is the essential one. These are the ones I would spend the money on. These are just a bit more of a nice to have. And also because you're squeezing onto the nut so hard, you can actually get a really good amount of power through it, and where they've got quite a nice long length as well. If there's something a little bit more unusual that you're trying to clamp onto, where you've got quite a small area for the spanner head to go onto, this, because you can get so much pressure through it, these really are good. The only one in this Barco set that I do find myself using actually reasonably often is this tiny one, and it's purely just for lock shield valves, where this is just really useful because of the size of it and how tiny the jaw is. Now, next one is for draining down. So this is a flexible plumb tub, and what you've got on these sides here is it squeezes. These are perfectly designed to fit around a pipe and to joint together. So you can just push that around the pipe and you get a really nice seal with this rubber. And you've got all different sizes here. So you've got, this one's 22mm, and you've got 15 here, and then this is your micro bore size. So most of the time, pretty much every time I use this, I'm using the 15 one on the end of a radiator. So it's really useful to just stick this on the end of the radiator, open up your valve, and all the water just drips down into this bucket. I mean, as you can see, mine's been quite well used. It's quite filthy. Other thing worth having is one of these flexible buckets. So this is just a 12-litre one, folds down to basically nothing. But with the flexibility of it, you can just shove it under anything. So anywhere you're trying to drain down, if you've got a leak, you'll always be able to fit this in, even if it's just quite an awkward space. Even if you can only just get the very end in underneath, you've still got a whole load of capacity that you'll fill up. Really useful. You never know when you're going to need this. And again, very inexpensive. Next ones are your keys. So this is a radiator key. So this just goes in the valves on the end of the radiator for bleeding them, letting air out, or if you're draining down a radiator, actually letting the air in. And this here is a 4-key tool, and so what I use this for is for the drain down. So this square perfectly fits your drain down valves, and you get enough leverage with the size of this. And the size of it also means that you can get it into the awkward spaces that you often find a drain down in. So this is a really useful one, again, very inexpensive. And these radiator keys, these are pennies, but really essential tools that everyone's going to need. Going along with the drain down, you also need a hose. You can buy quite reasonably expensive drain down hoses that fit on really nicely, or you can just use a garden hose, and that's what I do. So I just have a garden hose cut to the exact length that I need to get from the drain off I usually use to a drain outside. Occasionally you find the hose has got a bit cold and it's a bit difficult to get on there, but if you just squeeze it in your hand for a minute or so, it's plenty easy to just shove on. Next one is a bit of PTFE tape. Again, these are very, very cheap. These are pennies to buy. When you get leaks, the most common place you're probably going to get a leak is on a compression fitting, and one of the ways you can sort those is if just tightening up a little bit doesn't quite do it, you can wrap a bit of this around the olive. The other place, garden taps, that type of thing. If you've got a garden tap that's leaking, you can shove a bit of this around the thread, and that will usually stop it leaking. A slightly more expensive alternative is pipe thread compound like this. So it's like a liquid PTFE paste, and you can just shove that around the olive or around any threaded joint and it'll give you a really nice seal. But this is quite a bit more expensive than the very cheap PTFE. And if you're not doing that much plumbing, it's easier to just get the PTFE, but if you are doing quite a bit, this is useful to have. Another one is a wet vac, or wet and dry vac. So the one I've got here is a wet and dry vac, and I actually have two, so I use one for dry stuff only and one for wet stuff only, but they all do both. And the reason it's so useful is they will just suck up any water. So if you've got a leaking compression joint, or you're trying to drain down a system or get water out of a pipe to then do a joint, it's just so much easier to suck it out rather than waiting for it to all drain out with gravity on its own. A little bit more expensive and maybe not essential for most people, but useful to have, especially if you are doing a bit of DIY, to have a wet and a dry vac. One more useful one is these brass caps. So this is a thermostatic radiator valve, and occasionally these do dribble a bit, so even if you haven't fully turned off, you actually can get a little bit of water coming out of them. So what I've got on here is a brass cap, and these are very inexpensive, but they just have a rubber washer in the end here that compresses against this, and so when you tighten this up you get a really good seal. Really worth having a couple of these in your toolbox. Final one to have is a bit of blue roll, and this comes in really useful. The reason I like this so much is when it's wet, it changes colour. So if you're checking for leaks somewhere, you can immediately see that you've got a leak, whereas if you get a bit of white kitchen roll, put it underneath a compression joint or a radiator valve or something to see if it's leaking, you can't see. But the blue roll changes to quite a dark colour. Not sure how easy it is to see on the camera there, but I've just wet this piece and I can see that it's gone much darker on the bit that's wet than the rest of it, so it's really easy to tell that it's wet. So when you're checking for leaks, so much easier than kitchen roll or something, or even just putting your finger, you can't always feel a tiny droplet of water when you've got a really slow leak, but this will always show you. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more.